The calm before the storm. The Gilded Haven, nestled in the heart of the bustling metropolis, was one of the city's most luxurious hotels. Its pristine glass windows reflected the towering skyscrapers that surrounded it, and its golden spire could be seen from miles away. Tourists and wealthy businessmen alike frequented the establishment, its five-star rating a testament to the unparalleled quality of its service. Inside, the scent of polished wood, imported flowers, and the finest perfumes mingled in the air, offering an experience of elegance at every turn. Working at the Gilded Haven was a dream job for many, and for Darius Johnson, it had become more than just a job. It was his lifeline. At 33, Darius had been with the hotel for nearly 6 years, starting off as a lowly dishwasher and slowly working his way up to a respected waiter in the hotel's acclaimed Imperial dining room. Darius was no stranger to hard work. He grew up in a modest neighborhood where resources were scarce and opportunities even scarcer. His mother, a housekeeper, had raised him and his 2 younger siblings with grit and love, teaching him the values of resilience, integrity, and humility. Standing in front of the mirror in the staff locker room, Darius straightened his tie, his eyes tracing the neat folds of his crisp white shirt. The uniform was an emblem of his progress, a symbol of how far he had come. Every day, he wore it with pride, reminding himself of the sacrifices he made and the reasons he kept going. His thoughts drifted to home, where his wife, Monique, was heavily pregnant with their second child. They already had a daughter, Alia, who was 5 and full of curiosity about the world. Monique had given up her job as a teacher to take care of Alia, and now with a second baby on the way, Darius knew the weight of responsibility rested solely on his shoulders. The paycheck he brought home from the Gilded Haven not only paid the rent and bills, but also covered Monique's prenatal care. He often lay awake at night thinking about the future, knowing that losing this job would be devastating for his family. The pressure was immense, but Darius handled it the only way he knew how, with grace and quiet determination. The Imperial dining room was always abuzz with activity, and tonight was no different. A celebrity chef had taken over the kitchen for a week-long event, and the dining room was fully booked. The tables were set with the finest china, each piece perfectly placed, as the guests filtered in, dressed in the most expensive attire. Darius moved seamlessly between tables, his every movement precise and professional. He was well aware that his job wasn't just about serving food. It was about creating an experience for the elite clientele, ensuring that every detail was flawless. Yet, beneath the perfection of the room and the glamorous exterior of the hotel, Darius couldn't ignore the underlying tension that permeated the walls. Working in such a high-class establishment as a black man came with its own set of challenges. The subtle microaggressions were constant, be it a patron's reluctance to make eye contact or the way some of the older staff members spoke to him. It wasn't overt, but it was there, simmering under the surface, a constant reminder that no matter how hard he worked, to some people he was just the help. Darius had learned to let it roll off his back. He couldn't afford to dwell on it. He had a family to feed, a wife to care for, and a future to secure. Besides, there were others who looked up to him, especially his younger brother, Jamal, who had recently started working at a local mechanic shop. Darius was Jamal's role model, the one who had made it out, the one who had shown that it was possible to achieve more, even if the odds were stacked against you. That evening, the dining room was particularly crowded, and the buzz of conversation filled the air. Darius moved swiftly between tables, refilling glasses and clearing plates. As he approached one of the larger parties near the center of the room, he couldn't help but notice the tension at the table. A young couple, impeccably dressed, sat with their infant child, who was restless in the high chair. The mother, her face tight with frustration, tried to calm the baby with a toy, while the father busied himself with his phone. "Can we get some more water over here?" the man called out, not even glancing up as Darius approached. "Of course, sir," Darius replied, pouring water into the crystal glasses with practiced precision. The baby, however, seemed less interested in the toy and more in the piece of bread it had clutched in its tiny hand. As Darius turned to leave, the baby let out a sharp, choking sound, causing both parents to freeze. The mother's eyes widened in horror as the baby's face began to turn red. "Oh my God, he's choking!" she screamed, standing up so quickly that her chair toppled over. The father dropped his phone, panic flashing across his face as he grabbed the baby, shaking it in a desperate attempt to dislodge the food. But the baby's face was now turning blue, its tiny hands clawing at the air as it struggled to breathe. The room fell silent as every guest turned to watch the unfolding drama. For a moment, it seemed as though the world had stopped, the only sound the desperate gasps of the choking child. Without hesitation, Darius rushed forward. His training in first aid, which he had taken years ago at Monique's insistence, kicked in instantly. He gently but firmly took the baby from the father's arms, holding the infant at a slight angle and administering a series of back blows between the child's shoulder blades. The piece of bread flew from the baby's mouth, landing on the floor with a soft thud. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room as the baby let out a loud wail, its face slowly regaining its color. The mother sobbed, clutching her child to her chest, while the father stood there, speechless, staring at Darius as though he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. "Thank you," the mother whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you so much." Darius nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the eyes of the entire room on him, a mixture of awe and disbelief. But before he could say anything, the hotel manager, Mr. Pearson, appeared at his side, his face an unreadable mask. "Darius, a word, please," Mr. Pearson said, his tone clipped and formal. Darius followed the manager out of the dining room, his mind racing. He had saved the baby's life. Surely there wouldn't be any problem. But as they reached the back of the hotel, away from the prying eyes of the guests, Mr. Pearson turned to him, his expression icy. "While your actions were commendable," Mr. Pearson began, "I must remind you that we have protocols in place for dealing with such situations. You caused a disruption in the dining room, and that is simply unacceptable." Darius stared at him, stunned. "A disruption? I saved that child's life." "Yes, but in doing so, you disrupted the service and drew attention to yourself in a way that is not in line with the standards of the Gilded Haven." Darius felt a wave of disbelief wash over him. Was this really happening? Had he just saved a baby's life, only to be reprimanded for it? "I'm afraid I have no choice but to let you go," Mr. Pearson said, his voice cold and detached. Darius felt as though the ground had just been ripped out from under him. Fired for saving a child's life. As the weight of the words sank in, Darius realized that in the world of the Gilded Haven, where appearances and protocols mattered more than anything else, there was no room for someone like him, even when he was a hero. And so, without ceremony, Darius found himself walking out of the back entrance of the hotel, the city lights blurring before his eyes, his world crumbling around him. A broken world. Darius Johnson walked out of the Gilded Haven in a daze, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on him like an unbearable burden. The chill of the evening air slapped his face, but it did little to shake the numbness that had settled in his chest. He felt betrayed by a system that he had dedicated himself to for years, one that he had thought rewarded hard work, loyalty, and integrity. Instead, he had been cast aside, as if his contribution meant nothing. As he reached the corner of the street, the grandeur of the hotel faded behind him, replaced by the hum of city traffic. Cars whizzed past, their headlights blurring into streaks of white and yellow. People moved along the sidewalks, unaware of the storm of emotions brewing inside Darius. They were wrapped in their own lives, hurrying to catch taxis, rushing home after a long day, or meeting friends for dinner. Life went on as if nothing had changed, but for Darius, everything had. The reality of the situation began to sink in. He had lost his job. The one thing that had been keeping his family afloat was now gone, all because he had done what any decent human being would have done. He had saved a baby's life. His heart raced, his breath coming in shallow gasps as panic started to bubble up inside him. What would he tell Monique? How could he go home to her, knowing that he had failed the family they were building together? For a moment, Darius stood still, staring at the reflection of the hotel in the glass of a nearby building. The Gilded Haven, with all its gleaming lights and promises of luxury, now seemed like a distant dream, a place where he no longer belonged. He clenched his fists, the muscles in his jaw tightening as a wave of anger surged through him. How could they fire him for saving a life? The injustice of it gnawed at him, but there was nothing he could do. The decision had been made, and there was no going back. He pulled out his phone, his hand trembling slightly, and scrolled to Monique's number. He didn't know what to say. How do you explain to your pregnant wife that you've just lost your job because you did the right thing? How do you reassure her that everything is going to be okay when you're not even sure of that yourself? His thumb hovered over the call button for a few seconds before he put the phone back in his pocket. He couldn't tell her over the phone. This conversation needed to happen in person. Darius took a deep breath and started walking again, each step feeling heavier than the last. He decided to take the long way home, hoping to clear his mind before facing Monique. As he walked, memories of the evening played in his head on a loop. The baby's choking gasp, the panicked screams of the mother, and the moment he took the child in his arms, knowing he had the power to save a life. And then, Mr. Pearson's cold, calculating face as he delivered the devastating news. Unacceptable, Darius muttered under his breath, shaking his head in disbelief. He couldn't wrap his mind around it. What kind of world prioritized service over human life? He had always known that the world wasn't fair, but this was something else. This was a slap in the face, a reminder that no matter how hard he worked or how much he gave, he would always be disposable in the eyes of people like Mr. Pearson. It was a harsh truth that had always lurked in the shadows, but now it stood before him, unavoidable. He passed by a small park, where the last of the evening's light illuminated the faces of children playing on the swings, their laughter carrying on the wind. It reminded him of Alia, his bright, energetic daughter, who would be waiting for him at home, her big brown eyes full of questions, and her little voice eager to tell him about her day. Darius felt a lump form in his throat. What kind of father would he be if he couldn't provide for her? By the time Darius finally reached his apartment building, the sun had dipped below the horizon, and the streetlights had flickered on. He stood at the door for a moment, gathering his thoughts before stepping inside. The familiar sounds of home greeted him. The low hum of the refrigerator, the faint murmur of the television, and the soft padding of Alia's feet as she ran down the hallway to greet him. "Daddy," she squealed, throwing herself into his arms. Darius scooped her up, hugging her tightly, her small body warm and full of life. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to get lost in her joy, holding onto it as a lifeline. But as soon as he set her down, the weight of what he had to do came crashing back. "Hey, baby," Monique's voice called from the kitchen. "You're home late. Everything okay?" Darius hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't keep this from her any longer. He walked into the kitchen, where Monique stood at the stove, stirring a pot of spaghetti. Her round belly stretched the fabric of her t-shirt, and she looked up at him with a tired but loving smile. "Dinner's almost ready," she said, wiping her hands on a towel. "How was work?" Darius swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. "Monique, we need to talk." The smile faded from her face, replaced by concern. She set the towel down on the counter and turned to face him fully. "What's wrong, Darius? You're scaring me." He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. I lost my job today." Monique's eyes widened in shock. "What? How? Why? I don't understand." Darius ran a hand over his face, feeling the exhaustion settle into his bones. It happened so fast. There was this couple in the dining room with a baby, and the baby started choking. I didn't think. I just acted. I used the first aid training, you know. I saved the kid's life. Monique. But they said I disrupted service. That I caused a scene. Monique stared at him in disbelief. They fired you for saving a baby's life. That doesn't make any sense. I know, Darius said, his voice cracking. It doesn't make sense, but that's what happened. Mr. Pearson said it was against protocol, that I went outside the boundaries of my role. And now, I don't have a job. Monique's hand went to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. She took a step toward him, her voice trembling. What are we going to do, Darius? How are we going to pay the bills? What about the baby? Darius reached for her, pulling her into his arms. I don't know, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I don't know, but we'll figure it out. We always do. For a long moment, they stood there in the kitchen, holding each other, both of them trying to process the reality of their situation. Darius felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him harder than ever before. He couldn't afford to break down. Not now. Monique needed him to be strong, and so did Aaliyah. After a while, Monique pulled away, wiping her eyes. We'll get through this, she said, her voice stronger now. We've been through tough times before, and we've always come out on the other side. You'll find another job, Darius. You always do. Darius nodded, though he wasn't sure he believed it. The job market wasn't exactly forgiving, and being a black man in an industry dominated by appearances and privilege wasn't going to make things any easier. But he couldn't let Monique see his doubts. He had to believe it, for her sake. The next few days were a blur of uncertainty and fear. Darius spent hours online, searching for job openings and sending out resumes, but the responses were slow to come, and the ones that did trickle in weren't promising. The rejection emails piled up, each one a blow to his confidence. Meanwhile, the bills kept coming, and the clock was ticking on their savings. One evening, after another long day of job hunting, Darius sat at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. Monique was putting Aaliyah to bed, and the apartment was quiet except for the sound of the occasional car passing by outside. Darius felt a knot of frustration twist in his stomach. He had always been a provider, always found a way to make things work. But this time felt different. This time, the deck seemed stacked against him in a way he couldn't fight. A knock at the door startled him, pulling him out of his thoughts. He frowned, wondering who could be visiting at this hour. When he opened the door, he was surprised to see his brother, Jamal, standing there, looking as serious as Darius had ever seen him. Jamal, what are you doing here, man? Darius asked, stepping aside to let him in. Jamal stepped inside, glancing around the apartment before turning to face Darius. I heard what happened. About your job. Ma told me. Darius sighed, running a hand through his hair. Yeah, it's been rough, man. I don't even know what to do right now. Jamal nodded, his expression grim. Look, Darius, I know this is a tough spot, but I got an idea. It's not glamorous, but it might help get you through until you can find something else. Darius raised an eyebrow. What are you talking about? Jamal hesitated for a moment before answering. I've got a friend who runs a small delivery business. It's not much, but he's looking for drivers. The pay's decent, and it's flexible. You could start right away, just to keep some money coming in. Darius stared at his brother, feeling a mix of gratitude and frustration. He appreciated the offer, but delivering packages wasn't exactly what he had envisioned for himself after working at one of the most prestigious hotels in the city. Still, what choice did he have? New roads, old struggles. Darius sat across from his brother Jamal, the weight of the last few days heavy on his shoulders. The offer Jamal had just presented lingered in the air between them, and Darius couldn't help but feel a sense of defeat. Driving deliveries wasn't what he had worked for all these years, not after climbing the ranks at the Gilded Haven from dishwasher to one of the lead servers in the Imperial dining room. The thought of going from serving five-star meals to delivering packages felt like a step backward, like all of his hard work had been for nothing. But then, he reminded himself of the reality staring him in the face. He had a family to feed, a wife to support, and bills that wouldn't stop piling up. Jamal watched his older brother in silence, understanding the inner conflict that played out across Darius' face. Jamal had always admired Darius' work ethic and how he had carried the family on his back, especially after their father had passed away when they were kids. Darius had always been the one to step up, working odd jobs to help their mother keep food on the table, sacrificing his own dreams so that his siblings could have a shot at something better. But now, seeing his older brother struggle, Jamal felt a pang of guilt. He wished he could offer something more, something that aligned with Darius' skills and potential. "It's just temporary, man," Jamal said, breaking the silence. "I know it's not what you want to be doing, but it's something to hold you over. I can vouch for you with my friend, Rico. He'll treat you right." Darius nodded, though his heart wasn't fully in it. "I know, Jamal. I appreciate it. Really. I didn't expect things to turn out like this, you know. I thought I was building something over at the hotel. That maybe one day, I'd even move into management or something." Jamal leaned forward, his voice firm but filled with empathy. "I get it, D. You've been busting your ass for years. But the way they treated you, that's not on you. You did the right thing, and they couldn't see past their rules and protocols. Screw them. You're worth more than that place." Darius sighed. He knew Jamal was right, but it didn't ease the sting of losing something he had invested so much in. He had taken pride in his job, despite the challenges, and now it felt like everything had slipped away. But pride wasn't going to keep the lights on or pay for Monique's doctor visits. He had to be practical. "All right," Darius finally said, meeting his brother's gaze. "I'll do it. I'll take the job with your friend Rico, just until I can find something better." Jamal grinned, relief washing over his face. "That's what I'm talking about. I'll give Rico a call, and we'll get you set up. You'll be back on your feet in no time, bro." The next morning, Darius found himself in a small, cramped office on the south side of the city. The stark contrast between this place and the polished, gleaming halls of the Gilded Haven hit him immediately. The walls were lined with shelves filled with delivery boxes, the floors scuffed and worn from years of wear. A faint scent of oil and exhaust lingered in the air, a reminder that this wasn't a glamorous job. It was hard, gritty work, but work was work. And right now, Darius didn't have the luxury of being picky. Jamal's friend Rico was waiting for him inside, a stocky man in his mid-30s with a buzz cut and tattoos crawling up his neck. Despite his rough exterior, Rico greeted Darius with a wide, genuine smile, his handshake firm. "Jamal's told me a lot about you," Rico said, his voice a little gruff but friendly. "You've been working over at the Gilded Haven, huh? Must have been a nice gig." Darius shrugged, not wanting to dwell on the past. "It was. But things didn't work out. I'm just looking to make some money and keep things moving." Rico nodded, understanding. "I get it. Life throws curveballs sometimes, but you're in the right place. This delivery gig ain't fancy, but it's steady work, and I take care of my people. You put in the effort, and I'll make sure you're paid well for it." Darius appreciated the straightforwardness. He wasn't expecting anything glamorous here, but knowing that Rico had his back was reassuring. Rico showed him around the small warehouse, explaining how the delivery routes were assigned and the kinds of packages they handled. Everything from electronics to furniture to small business supplies. It wasn't too different from what Darius had done at the hotel, in terms of keeping things organized and working efficiently, but it lacked the elegance and refinement of his old job. Still, it felt honest, and right now, that was something Darius could hold on to. Within a few days, Darius was on the road, his new uniform a simple gray shirt with the company's logo embroidered on the chest. He had been given a beat-up delivery van, and his routes took him all over the city, from upscale neighborhoods with sprawling mansions to gritty urban blocks where the pavement was cracked and the buildings were boarded up. The work was physically demanding, and the long hours left him exhausted by the end of each day. But there was something therapeutic about it, too. Being behind the wheel of the van gave Darius time to think, to process everything that had happened over the past few weeks. The sun rose and set as Darius crisscrossed the city, delivering packages to strangers who barely noticed him. Just another delivery driver in a sea of workers trying to make ends meet. He spent hours navigating traffic, lifting heavy boxes, and walking up and down endless flights of stairs. But through it all, he kept his mind focused on one thing: his family. Monique had been incredibly supportive, even though Darius knew she was worried. Every night when he came home, she greeted him with a tired smile, always asking how his day went. She never once complained about the change in their circumstances, even though the stress was written across her face as clearly as if it had been etched in stone. One evening, as Darius collapsed onto the couch after a long day of deliveries, Monique sat down beside him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Alia was already in bed, and the apartment was quiet. "How's it going with the new job?" she asked softly, her eyes filled with concern. Darius hesitated for a moment before answering. It's fine. It's not what I want to be doing, but it's work. We're getting by." Monique nodded, but Darius could see the doubt in her eyes. She didn't press him, though, knowing that he was doing everything he could to keep their family afloat. "I've been thinking," Monique said after a pause. "Maybe it's time we talked about moving. I know we love this place, but with the baby coming and everything going on, we might need to look for something a little more affordable." Darius felt a pang of guilt. He knew Monique was right, but the thought of leaving their apartment, the place where they had built their life together, felt like another loss. Still, he couldn't deny the financial strain they were under. "I don't want to move," Darius admitted, his voice quiet. "But if it comes to that, we'll do what we have to. We'll find a way." Monique leaned her head against his shoulder, her warmth a comfort in the midst of the uncertainty. "I know we will. We always do." The days stretched into weeks, and Darius slowly settled into his new routine. He wasn't thrilled with the work, but he did it well, taking pride in the fact that he was still providing for his family, even if it wasn't in the way he had envisioned. The paycheck wasn't as steady or as lucrative as his old one, but it was enough to cover the essentials, and for now, that was all that mattered. But as time went on, Darius began to notice the way people looked at him when he made deliveries, especially in the wealthier parts of town. He'd pull up to a mansion or a high-rise building, and the doorman, the homeowners, or the security guards would eye him with suspicion. Sometimes they wouldn't even open the door, preferring to have him leave the package on the step as if he were some kind of threat. The subtle racism that he had experienced at the Gilded Haven was still present here, but in a different form. He wasn't the waiter in a fancy restaurant anymore. Now he was the delivery guy, a faceless, nameless worker who could be ignored, disrespected, or treated with suspicion without consequence. Darius had grown accustomed to brushing off microaggressions in his old job, but this was different. Here, he felt more invisible than ever before, a ghost who existed only to serve the needs of others. One particular day, as Darius was delivering a package to a luxury apartment building, a middle-aged woman in a designer coat approached him as he unloaded a large box from the back of the van. Her eyes flickered over him, narrowing slightly as if she were assessing whether he belonged. "You're here for a delivery?" she asked, her tone brisk. Darius nodded. "Yes, Mom. Just dropping off a package for apartment 14B. The woman pursed her lips, her gaze lingering on him for a moment longer than necessary. "Make sure you leave it by the service entrance," she said curtly, turning on her heel without waiting for a response. Darius stood there for a moment, the box still in his hands, a familiar sense of frustration and anger simmering beneath the surface. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't a threat. He was just a man trying to do his job, but that didn't seem to matter to people like her. They saw him only through the lens of their own prejudices, and no matter how hard he worked or how much he gave, he would always be reduced to the color of his skin and the uniform he wore. As the weeks turned into months, Darius continued to grind through the days, doing his best to keep his family afloat. The delivery job wasn't his dream, but it was a lifeline, a temporary fix to a problem he hadn't yet figured out how to solve. But deep down, Darius knew that he couldn't do this forever. Something had to change. A new hope amidst the struggles. The soft glow of early morning sunlight seeped through the blinds of their small apartment as Darius stirred in bed. The faint scent of Monique's homemade breakfast filled the air, and for a moment, he let himself linger in that peaceful cocoon of domestic life. But as soon as he opened his eyes, reality crashed back down. The stack of bills on the kitchen counter, the upcoming doctor's visit for the baby, Alia's growing list of needs for school. The weight of it all sat on his chest like an immovable boulder. The delivery job wasn't cutting it. Even after a couple of months on the road, hustling through the city's congested streets from dawn until dusk, he could barely keep up. His mind raced constantly with numbers. Calculating, recalculating, and no matter how he tried to slice it, they were just getting by. The hard truth was, without the steady income he had at the hotel, things were unraveling faster than he'd anticipated. Sitting up, Darius swung his legs over the side of the bed and rubbed his face with his hands. Monique was in the kitchen, her hair tied back in a loose bun, still moving with a tired grace despite her visible exhaustion. Pregnancy was taking its toll, and Darius couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. She shouldn't have had to bear the brunt of this stress. But she did, and she did it without complaint, always there with a smile for him, always reassuring him that everything would be okay, even when he wasn't sure it would be. "Morning, babe," Monique said, her voice soft, but carrying the warmth he so desperately needed. "I made some eggs and toast. Want some before you head out?" Darius forced a smile and nodded. "Yeah, thanks, babe. I'll take some." As he sat at the small kitchen table, he watched Monique move around the kitchen, her belly gently curving out from under her shirt. She hummed quietly as she worked, trying to keep the mood light. Alia was still asleep in her room, giving them a rare quiet moment together. Monique placed a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of him, then sat down across the table. She eyed him carefully, sensing the storm brewing behind his eyes. After all these years, she could read him like an open book. "How are you feeling today?" she asked, keeping her tone gentle, but Darius could hear the underlying concern. He shrugged, picking at the toast on his plate. "I don't know, Monique. I feel like I'm just treading water, you know. Like no matter how hard I work, we're still stuck." Monique reached across the table and took his hand in hers, her touch soft and reassuring. "I know it's tough, Darius. I can see how hard you're working, and I appreciate everything you're doing for us. But maybe it's time to think about what's next. I know you don't want to do deliveries forever." Darius sighed, running a hand through his short hair. "I don't want to, but what choice do I have? The hotel was everything I worked for." And now, he trailed off, the frustration evident in his voice. Monique squeezed his hand. "What happened at the hotel wasn't your fault. You did the right thing, and they couldn't see that. But that place wasn't the only opportunity out there. You have so much more to offer." Darius leaned back in his chair, the tension in his shoulders finally starting to ease a little. Monique always knew how to ground him, how to remind him of his worth when the world seemed determined to tear him down. "I don't even know where to start," Darius admitted. "I've been thinking about applying for other jobs, but every time I look, it feels like I'm back at square one, like no one cares about all the years I put in at the hotel." Monique looked at him intently. "What if you stopped waiting for someone to give you an opportunity? What if you made your own?" Darius raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean?" She smiled, that confident spark returning to her eyes. "You've been talking about how much you learned at the hotel, how you got a feel for running the dining room, managing the staff, interacting with customers. Maybe it's time to put that knowledge to use for yourself. Darius blinked. The thought hadn't even occurred to him. You mean, like start my own business? Monique nodded enthusiastically. Why not? You have the experience, and you know what it takes to run a high-quality service. Plus, you have connections from the hotel. I've seen the way people respected you when you were on the floor. You could do it. The idea seemed wild at first. Darius, running his own business. He had never considered himself an entrepreneur. But as Monique's words sank in, he realized that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't as far-fetched as it seemed. He had spent years in the hospitality industry, absorbing every detail of what made a great dining experience. He knew how to organize a team, how to provide impeccable service, and how to navigate the complex world of customer expectations. Perhaps he didn't need to rely on someone else to recognize his worth. Maybe, he said slowly, the gears in his mind starting to turn. But it would take money to get something like that off the ground, and we don't exactly have extra cash lying around. Monique tilted her head, not dissuaded. True, but we can start small, maybe catering. You wouldn't need a storefront, just a kitchen, and you can do events here and there to build up your name. Darius' mind began racing with possibilities. Catering, it was something he could do. He had watched the chefs at the hotel, learning how to execute dishes with precision. He had seen how events were coordinated, how the service had to flow seamlessly from start to finish. Maybe this wasn't such a crazy idea after all. It could work, he said, the excitement building in his chest. We'd have to be smart about it, start small, like you said. But if we did it right. Monique grinned, clearly pleased to see the fire returning to his eyes. I believe in you, Darius, and I'll help however I can. We can make this happen. Over the next few days, the seed of the idea began to grow. Darius spent every spare moment researching how to start a catering business, from the legal paperwork to the logistics of food preparation and service. He reached out to a few former colleagues from the Gilded Haven, cautiously asking about their experience with private events and whether they knew of any opportunities where he might be able to get his foot in the door. To his surprise, a few of them were more than willing to help, offering advice, and even passing along some potential leads for small gigs. The spark of hope that Monique had ignited in him was starting to burn brighter. Maybe this was the fresh start he needed. A chance to take control of his own future instead of waiting for someone else to dictate it. One afternoon, while Darius was out on a delivery route, his phone buzzed with a new email notification. He pulled over to the side of the road and checked his inbox, his heart skipping a beat as he saw the subject line. Private event inquiry. It was from an old regular at the hotel, a couple who frequently hosted upscale dinner parties and had always been impressed with Darius' service. He quickly opened the email, his eyes scanning the text. Hi Darius. We hope this email finds you well. We were wondering if you might be available to help us with a private dinner party we're hosting next month. We're looking for someone with your experience to manage the service and possibly recommend a caterer. Please let us know if you're interested. Darius sat in the van, stunned. His hands trembled as he reread the email, a wave of excitement and disbelief washing over him. This was it, the opportunity he had been waiting for. The couple hadn't just asked him to serve at their event. They wanted him to manage it, to oversee the entire operation. It was the perfect chance to dip his toes into the world of private catering and event management. He quickly typed out a reply, trying to keep his tone professional despite the excitement coursing through him. Thank you for reaching out. I would love to discuss the details further and help you make this event a success. Let's set up a time to talk and go over everything. After hitting send, Darius sat back in the driver's seat, his heart pounding in his chest. For the first time in a long while, he felt something he hadn't felt since losing his job at the Gilded Haven. Hope. Maybe this was the beginning of something new, something better than he had even imagined. That evening, when he got home, he shared the news with Monique. She practically jumped out of her chair with excitement, wrapping her arms around him in a tight hug. I told you. she exclaimed, her face lighting up with pride. "This is just the beginning, Darius. You've got this." Darius hugged her back, feeling the warmth of her confidence seeping into him. For the first time since his world had been turned upside down, he began to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay. Rising from the ashes, Darius could hardly believe the opportunity that had just landed in his lap. The email from the old regular at the Gilded Haven, the couple who wanted him to manage their private dinner party, was the spark he needed. For months, he had been feeling like a failure, spiraling into self-doubt after losing his job at the hotel. Now, for the first time since that awful day, it felt like a door was opening. He and Monique spent the next few nights after Aaliyah went to bed sitting at their tiny kitchen table, planning, brainstorming, and sketching out ideas for the dinner party. Monique, despite being heavily pregnant, was right beside him, jotting down notes and offering suggestions. They created a rough outline for the event, discussing everything from the flow of the evening to the type of service the clients would expect. As the details started to take shape, Darius realized this could be more than just a one-time job. If he did well, word could spread. Private event management and catering wasn't a bad gig, especially if he could get enough high-end clients. There was potential here, real potential, for him to build something of his own. But there was still one major hurdle standing between him and that dream: money. The couple hadn't asked him to just oversee the event. They wanted him to recommend a caterer. That meant he needed to pull together a small crew and rent out a kitchen space to prepare the food. He had learned enough at the hotel to know that no high-end client would want cheap takeout or a thrown-together menu. This would need to be top-notch, something that reflected the elegance they were used to. And all of that would cost money, money that Darius simply didn't have. The next morning, after another restless night of going over budgets in his head, Darius decided it was time to take a risk. He grabbed his phone and called Rico, the owner of the small delivery company where he was still working. "Hey, Darius. What's good, man?" Rico's voice was as upbeat as always, but Darius wasn't in the mood for pleasantries. "Rico, I gotta talk to you about something," Darius said, getting straight to the point. "I've got a potential gig, something big. It's not a delivery, though. It's catering." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and Darius could almost hear Rico's eyebrow raising. "Catering, huh? That's a bit of a switch-up." "Yeah, I know," Darius said, rubbing his temple. "But I've been in the hospitality industry for years. I know how to run events. I need a little help to get started. I'm trying to rent a kitchen space and pull together a team, but I don't have the cash to make it happen." Rico was quiet for a moment, and Darius' heart pounded in his chest. This was a long shot. He knew that. But if anyone might be willing to help him out, it was Rico. The guy had been in his shoes once before, grinding from nothing to build his own business from the ground up. Finally, Rico spoke, his voice more serious than Darius had ever heard it. "Look, man, I know how hard it is to get something off the ground. I respect the hustle. But you know I'm not a bank, right? I can't just hand out loans." Darius felt his stomach drop. He had expected this, but it didn't make the disappointment any easier to swallow. I know. I wouldn't ask if I wasn't desperate." Rico sighed. "How much are you talking about?" "I'm thinking $5,000. Just enough to cover the food, the kitchen rental, and a small crew. I can pay you back as soon as I get paid for the event. It's a guaranteed gig." There was another long pause on the line, and Darius held his breath, hoping against hope that Rico would take the risk. $5,000, huh?" Rico finally said, letting out a low whistle. "All right, here's what I'll do. I'll give you $2,000 up front. Consider it an advance on your salary for the next few months. You still gotta make deliveries while you're doing this catering thing, though. I can't lose you as a driver." Darius felt a surge of gratitude. It wasn't the full amount he needed, but it was enough to get started, and it was more than he had expected from Rico. "Thank you, man. I really appreciate it. I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Rico said, his tone lightening. "Just make sure this gig goes well, all right? You might have something big on your hands." With the money from Rico, Darius immediately got to work. He reached out to some former coworkers from the Gilded Haven, asking if they'd be willing to help with the event on short notice. To his surprise, several of them were eager to join him, either because they respected his work or simply needed the extra cash. He pulled together a small but skilled crew, 2 chefs, a sous chef, and a couple of servers who knew how to deliver top-tier service. The next hurdle was finding a kitchen. Darius spent hours scouring the city for a space that was both affordable and up to the standards of the high-end clientele he was serving. After days of searching, he finally found a small, well-equipped commercial kitchen that he could rent by the day. It wasn't fancy, but it had everything they needed to prepare the kind of meal that would wow his clients. Monique helped him finalize the menu. A mix of modern American dishes with a touch of French influence, something elegant but not too pretentious. Darius knew his clients wanted something refined but approachable, and he was determined to deliver that. The pressure mounted with each passing day, but he stayed focused, driven by the knowledge that this was his chance to turn everything around. As the date of the event approached, Darius found himself working harder than ever. By day, he still drove deliveries, navigating the city's congested streets, lifting heavy boxes, and dealing with the occasional rude customer. But as soon as his shift ended, he would rush to the rented kitchen, overseeing the preparations for the dinner party. His body was exhausted, but his mind was sharper than ever. The long hours didn't faze him, not when he had so much riding on this one event. Monique, despite her pregnancy, stayed by his side every step of the way. She helped organize the logistics, manage the communication with the clients, and even took care of some last-minute shopping for ingredients when Darius was too busy to leave the kitchen. Her unwavering support was what kept him going when the stress threatened to overwhelm him. Finally, the night of the event arrived. Darius stood in the kitchen, surveying the plates of perfectly crafted hors d'oeuvres lined up on the counter. His team moved with quiet efficiency around him, the tension palpable but controlled. They had done everything they could to prepare. Now it was time to deliver. The dinner party was being held in the couple's luxurious penthouse, a sprawling space with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered breathtaking views of the city skyline. When Darius and his team arrived, they were greeted warmly by the hosts, who seemed genuinely excited to see him. That was a good sign. As the evening unfolded, Darius moved seamlessly through the penthouse, coordinating the servers, ensuring that the food was delivered at the perfect temperature, and managing the flow of the courses with the kind of precision he had honed during his years at the Gilded Haven. Every detail mattered. Every plate had to be flawless, every glass filled before it was empty, and every guest attended to without being intrusive. Darius watched as the guests, a mix of high-profile business people and socialites, savored each dish with delight. The room buzzed with conversation and laughter, the atmosphere one of effortless elegance, exactly what Darius had hoped to achieve. The highlight of the evening came with the main course, a perfectly cooked rack of lamb, paired with a rich red wine reduction, and served alongside seasonal vegetables. As the plates were placed in front of the guests, Darius held his breath, waiting for their reactions. One by one, the guests took their first bites, their faces lighting up with pleasure. The hosts exchanged a glance and smiled at Darius, nodding their approval. It was the validation he had been waiting for. By the end of the night, Darius felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. The event had gone off without a hitch, and the clients were thrilled. As they prepared to leave, the couple approached him, their expressions warm and appreciative. "Darius, this was incredible," the wife said, shaking his hand. "You really outdid yourself. We'll definitely be recommending you to our friends." Her husband nodded in agreement. "We've hosted a lot of events, but this one was something special. Thank you." Darius smiled, a wave of relief washing over him. "I'm just glad you're happy. It was a pleasure working with you." As they left the penthouse that night, Darius felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of purpose, of possibility. This was more than just a job. It was the beginning of something new, something that belonged to him. He wasn't just another worker punching the clock anymore. He was creating something of his own, something that had the potential to grow and flourish. As he and his team packed up the last of their equipment, Darius glanced out at the city skyline, the lights twinkling in the distance. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face it. He wasn't just rising from the ashes. He was forging a new path, one step at a time, building a legacy. The night of the penthouse dinner party had been a defining moment in Darius's life. The success of that event opened doors he hadn't even known existed. Within days, word began to spread among the social elite, and his phone started ringing with inquiries. More people wanted to hire him for private events, asking for the same attention to detail and personal touch that had made the penthouse party such a triumph. For the first time in months, Darius felt a sense of momentum building. What had started as a desperate gamble, trying to create something out of the chaos his life had become, was now taking on a life of its own. The inquiries weren't just for small dinner parties anymore. People were asking him to manage large events, from weddings to corporate galas. His catering business, which he had barely begun to dream of, was evolving faster than he could have anticipated. But as the business grew, so did the pressure. Darius was no stranger to hard work, but balancing everything was proving to be a challenge. He still had his delivery job with Rico, and while the catering gigs were bringing in more money, they weren't yet enough to let him quit. The long hours were beginning to take a toll, both physically and mentally, and Monique, now nearing the end of her pregnancy, was starting to show signs of strain as well. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of deliveries and client meetings, Darius returned home to find Monique sitting at the kitchen table, her face drawn with exhaustion. She had been handling the administrative side of the catering business, managing inquiries, coordinating with vendors, and keeping track of the finances. It was a lot for anyone, let alone someone who was 9 months pregnant. "Hey, babe," Darius said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder as he sat down next to her. "You look tired. You should be resting." Monique offered him a weak smile, but he could see the worry etched on her face. "I'm fine. Just trying to stay on top of everything. We got 2 events next week, and I'm still waiting on confirmations from the florists. And the venue for the corporate luncheon still hasn't confirmed the final headcount." Her voice trailed off as she rubbed her belly absent-mindedly. Darius frowned, guilt gnawing at him. Monique had been his rock throughout this entire journey, but she was carrying too much of the load. "You've done more than enough, Monique," Darius said gently, taking her hand in his. "We need to find some help. I can't have you running yourself ragged like this, especially with the baby coming any day now." Monique sighed, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I know you're right, but hiring more help means more expenses, and we're already stretched thin. I just want to make sure we're stable before we bring in more people." Darius was quiet for a moment, staring at the bills piled on the counter. Monique was right. They weren't in a position to be reckless with their money, but at the same time, they couldn't keep going like this. Something had to give. "I've been thinking about this a lot," Darius said after a pause. "I think it's time to take the next step. I need to go all in on the business." Monique pulled back slightly, looking up at him in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I mean I need to quit the delivery job," Darius said, the words feeling heavy but inevitable. "It's time to focus on the catering full-time. We can't keep doing both, and if we're going to grow, I need to be all in." Monique's eyes widened. "But Darius, what if it's not enough? The deliveries have been keeping us afloat. The catering jobs are good, but they're not guaranteed every week." "I know," Darius admitted, running a hand through his hair. "But this is our chance, Monique. I can feel it. The demand is there, and we're already getting more bookings. If I can dedicate more time to building the business, if I can put everything into this, We'll make it work. I know it's a risk, but I'm willing to take it." Monique studied his face for a long moment, her expression a mixture of concern and admiration. She knew how much this business meant to him, how much he had sacrificed to get to this point. And deep down, she trusted him. She had seen him rise from the ashes after losing his job at the hotel. She had seen him fight for their family, refusing to let their circumstances define them. Finally, she nodded, her eyes softening with understanding. "If you believe in this, then I'm with you. We'll make it work together." Darius smiled, relief flooding through him. He leaned in and kissed her forehead. "Thank you, babe. I couldn't do any of this without you." The next day, Darius went to Rico's office to break the news. As he sat across from his boss, he felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach. Rico had been good to him, giving him a job when he needed it most and even advancing him money for the catering business. Darius hated the thought of letting him down. But as he explained his decision, Rico listened quietly, nodding thoughtfully. "I get it, man," Rico said after Darius had finished. "I've seen how hard you've been working. You're chasing something bigger, and I respect that. Hell, I did the same thing when I started this delivery business. You gotta take the leap if you want to make it." Darius smiled, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. "I really appreciate everything you've done for me, Rico. I couldn't have gotten this far without you." Rico waved a hand dismissively. "Don't sweat it. Just make sure you succeed, all right. You've got a lot of talent, Darius. I'd hate to see it go to waste." "I won't let you down," Darius promised, shaking Rico's hand firmly. With the delivery job behind him, Darius threw himself into the catering business full-time. He and Monique hired a part-time assistant to help with the administrative work, freeing up Monique to focus on preparing for the baby. Darius also expanded his network, reaching out to more chefs, servers, and event planners who could help him handle larger events. As the weeks went by, the business continued to grow. Darius secured more high-profile clients, and soon they were booking events months in advance. The word-of-mouth recommendations were spreading like wildfire. People appreciated not only the quality of the food, but also the level of personal care and service that Darius brought to every event. His reputation as someone who went above and beyond was becoming his calling card. One evening, as Darius sat in the kitchen going over invoices, Monique came in, holding her phone with a look of excitement on her face. "You're not going to believe this," she said, handing him the phone. Darius looked at the screen and felt his heart skip a beat. It was an email from one of the city's most prestigious event planning firms, asking if he would be interested in becoming their go-to caterer for high-end corporate events and galas. "This could be huge," Monique said, her voice filled with awe. "If we partner with them, it could take the business to a whole new level." Darius stared at the email, his mind racing. This was exactly the kind of opportunity he had dreamed of when he first started the business. It was a chance to take things to the next level, to build something that could provide for his family for years to come. But as he sat there, staring at the phone, he also realized something else. This wasn't just about him anymore. It wasn't just about proving something to the world or making a name for himself. It was about creating a legacy, for Monique, for Aliyah, and for the baby they were about to welcome into the world. He looked up at Monique, his heart swelling with gratitude. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Monique smiled, her eyes shimmering with pride. "We have, and we're just getting started." A few weeks later, Darius stood in the hospital room, cradling their newborn son in his arms. Monique lay in the bed, exhausted but beaming with joy as she watched Darius hold their baby for the first time. Aliyah, sitting next to her mother, leaned in close to get a better look at her new little brother. "What do you think, Daddy?" Aliyah asked, her voice full of wonder. Darius smiled, his heart full to bursting as he looked down at his son. "I think he's perfect." As he held his newborn son, Darius felt an overwhelming sense of peace. For the first time in what felt like forever, the weight of the world seemed to lift. His journey had been long and full of obstacles, but he had found his way through. He had built something meaningful, not just for himself but for his family. The business was thriving, but more importantly, they were thriving as a family. He had fought to overcome the odds, to rise from the depths of disappointment and hardship, and now he was holding the future in his arms. As he looked at Monique and Alia, and then down at his son, Darius knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. He wasn't just building a business anymore. He was building a legacy, one that would carry his family forward, long after he was gone. And in that moment, standing in the hospital room with his family, Darius felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. And this time, he knew it wasn't just a fleeting feeling. This time, it was real. This time, it was forever.